Hey, everybody, it's Monday night, Pine Island Research coming live from the Untold radio studio. Welcome, everybody. Lots to talk about. Great show in store tonight. I'm excited. Got my friend James Lady back from Michigan Aboriginal. This is my 38th week here since we started the Untold Radio Network channel of multiple shows. I started out with Pine Island Research as my own YouTube channel, did that for about 9-10 months, and then joined Doug Hychek with the Untold Radio Network, along with some other great hosts who brought their show here so that we could cover multiple nights a week rather than just one night a week on one channel. And in the third week of my stay here at Untold Radio, I had James on, and it was such a great show. He has had a lot going on since we were together last time, so I wanted to have him back. I've had requests to have him back, so I'm excited about that. The other thing I wanted to mention is Legend Meets Science 2 reached its funding goal. Came down to the wire. It's a 30-day campaign to raise $80,000 to finish the production. And with about a day and a half left, was at about $37,000. It wasn't quite halfway there. And in that last 30-some hours, they rallied the troops, and thank you everyone who came together and supported that. They met their goal. Wanted to put up, I've had people asking since then, and I've seen others ask in different shows chats if there's a way to still support it or, get your name in the credits. A $10 donation got your name in the credits. $30, you could pre-order everything and get it possibly at a little bit earlier release date than the rest of the general public. And a lot of people wanted to take advantage of that too. You still can. I've got the website up, hangar1publishing.com. You can go there and you will see that all the different levels of support you could have came in at on the Kickstarter campaign is still available. There's still some things that need to be paid for, but the $80,000 covers the minimum of the studio work and the camera work and some of the lab testing, things like that. There's still some things that need to be covered, but plenty of time to do it. And I think if enough people go on and just simply pre-order the production, the documentary, it comes in 2 parts. That'll help them cover that. But we'll leave that up just for a little bit. Want to thank everyone in chat. So many friends. I mean, I just talked about how this is my 38th week at Untold. Prior to that, when I was on my old channel for quite a while, so many of people who I've gotten to know as friends were in the chat, and they followed us over here, and that list has grown. And I just got to tell you, it really is quite a compliment to see you guys show up every week and see you in chat. And I want you to know that I appreciate that. We also upload the show about a couple hours after we are done with the live stream here on YouTube. It is put out to all the podcast platforms where we reach about 5 to 10 times the YouTube viewers in our podcast listenership. So I want to thank everybody on that too. You guys on the podcast, listening on podcast, going to enjoy tonight's guest because we've got audio recordings we're going to be sharing. And that's so much easier to digest when you're listening on podcasts than the videos that you don't get to see. I always feel bad about doing shows where we share picture data to consider videos. And our podcast listeners are probably like, what are they looking at? So tonight will be a great show for them because we've got plenty of audio recordings to listen to. Other than that, it's starting to feel like summer. Other than the haze from the Canadian fires, me and Doug talked about that this morning on Coffee Time a bit. that was an interesting conversation because, for the last few years, we've had this haze from Canadian fires that kind of comes down through the upper 48 here in the United States. I've heard people talking about it from the East Coast to the West Coast, and in the Midwest here this time. And it's pretty early in the season for us to be experiencing that. Usually it's late summer when things are really dry, but we haven't had all the precipitation we normally do, and perhaps that has something to do with it. But I've also noticed a stench to the smoke. I mean, it's not just hazy outside. It smells kind of like burning plastic or burning, I don't know how to describe that, but it doesn't smell. Typically, you'd see even ash floating in the breeze sometimes down here when you had a north breeze. But you never really had much smell. And if there was, it was just kind of a faint burning wood smell. But it almost kind of smells like garbage burning. So I don't know what you folks are doing up there in Canada, but we can smell you. We can smell you down here for sure. And I hope wherever these fires are going, which it sounds like multiple locations, that they get under control soon. We certainly don't need to be losing more forests than we need to. But you're right. John Ayers says it makes the sunsets pretty, Jeff. What it also does is we had a little bit of a southwest breeze, I think it was this morning. Sunny, no clouds in the sky. Looked like, hey, let's get the swimsuits on and go lay out, right? And by 1 o'clock, it looked like it was about 8:30 at night, like it was right before sundown. Kind of dim out. And I'm looking, there's no really clouds out there. It's just a haze. It just is crazy how a little bit of a northwest or north wind will just blow that right down here. But again, anybody who's experiencing the issues with those fires up north, our hearts go out to you. I hope everybody stays safe, and I hope they get under control soon. But let's get on with the show. Let's bring in my guest here, James. Hey, James, how are you?
How are you, sir? I'm well. Glad to be here, and thank you. You're a man of your word.
Well,
I've been back.
Had an awful lot of people who really enjoyed the show. I said out of 38 shows now with Untold, that was my third show, and so it was relatively new. It's probably working out a few kinks.
Yeah, back in the day.
But yeah, no, it's great to have you back.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I know you make a couple fairly decent sized excursions a year out in your area and do some pretty extensive research out there, bringing audio devices, cameras, things like that with you. And you had mentioned you've had a couple things that happened this last year since we talked last. And as soon as you said that, I was like, we got to get you scheduled because I want to hear about it. So
yeah, I've had an amazing journey. The entire journey has been amazing, from the going down the rabbit hole phase to actually getting into the field, getting your hands dirty, and trying to figure out what works in this incredibly complex puzzle that we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, when we look at each other, when we look at what each other's doing out in the field, it's easier to deduce maybe what doesn't work than it is to figure out what does, because oftentimes, if anything, we're getting ideas, we're expanding on these techniques and these approaches that we could take, but all of them require a little tweaking, and we learn from our mistakes and we get better at it. And if we just had to rely on ourselves and our own experiences to get better, we wouldn't get better very quickly. So it's awesome to be able to hear others' experiences.
I've fallen down a lot, and it's the old piece of wisdom. I don't know the origins of it, but one must first become the fool in order to become the master. So I've been way out there. I've been crazed, like I think we all have. Get a little dose of the guano loco kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it happens to all of us. But it's been the world's greatest adventure. I like to call it the world's greatest safari on a beer budget. And anybody can do this. And I've found a little method that consistently brings me results, and I'm happy to share what I know to the crowd, because it is a very fulfilling journey and adventure for me, and I'd like others to partake in it. But
yeah, you had mentioned it. Sometimes a lot of us are on a beer budget, right? But really, you bring up a good point. I mean, we've talked in the past on my show about kind of the nuts and bolts and the things that we use in research. And surprisingly, you can get some pretty good equipment without blowing big bucks. I mean, some of these Zoom audio recorders are just so great. And a few other brands too are just so great at picking up these audio recordings, especially when left in areas for prolonged periods of time or overnight where you're not there. And you can get them for $139, $159.
Well, this unit was a gift to me by a friend of mine. It's a $30 unit. It has no computer interface. It was it was quite an adventure trying to figure out the puzzle of how to get the audio off this without a computer interface. I had to jury rig a few things after doing some extensive research on YouTube, where I'd rather be researching the Sasquatch phenomenon. But the most significant piece of audio came off this little, it's practically a disposable unit, but it's not bad. It has the VA mode. The first time I used it, it was a new teepee I found in a valley up in northern Michigan, and I left it there, and it picked up almost 4 minutes of stuff that helped me decipher the audio capture of 2 nights before, when I had an encounter with multiple subjects. People could listen to that encounter. It's called In Their Midst. I have 2 versions of it. One gives up a little and reveals a lot. The other reveals even more, but you lose something from the original, less filtered version, if you will. But this little recorder, $30. Once I got the audio off and just followed my nose and my ears, if you will.
The idea of being able to, pick up 2 or 3 or 4 of them for under $120, $130 and be able to put them in directionally in different areas around the outside perimeters of maybe a campsite that you're staying in, trying to
very important
catch them expressing their curiosity towards what you may be doing there. If you go out and pick them up and one's broken half, you're not on your hands and knees in tears about it, because it really wasn't that huge of an investment. I would like to hear a little bit about when you go out and you capture hours and hours of audio. With mine, I come back and put it on a spectrograph, and I can actually just really race through it and wait till I see any movement on the graph itself. But even that takes an awful lot of time. I mean, I've left audio recorders out for like 72 hours before, and it took me 5-6 hours to go through all the audio on it.
Oh yeah.
So it's time consuming.
It is. It really is. But my kids are grown and gone. My wife works late on Mondays, so this is the evening of my indulgence. These Monday evenings. So I explore. But having recently been returned from a trip, I've got oodles of audio. I don't know how many hours in total. But I've gone through already 7 and a quarter hours of this stuff, and what if in the listener's crowd and in the audience there, if anybody wants to do what I do, I look for actual structures, things that are not questionable, but things that are absolutely deliberate: teepees, wigwams, lean-tos, and generally, if you keep leaving recorders there, you're going to pick something up. But most of the time, they speak in a very furtive manner that's very difficult to detect. The most recent audio recording I sent to you sounds like a little scratchy noises, or I think you may have put it in the past, a couple chipmunks at a bag of potato chips, which I love, because a lot of that stuff is so it sounds benign, but something's making that noise. And when it
Yeah.
has cadence and a melodic sort of presence, that's when I sort of, get my curiosity up and I investigate those little clips. And a lot of the times they come out with actual speech. They
Yeah.
have it's a very weird speech, and it's softer than the sound of the rain, if you will. But you can pick it up if you train your ears. It's like a harmonic resonant, um, excuse me, harmonic resonant sort of vocal modality. I don't know
Yeah.
how
Even though
else I
it's
can
not
explain it.
sharply projected, you can just the syllable spacing, and it still makes it pretty easily identifiable when it's there.
Yeah, yeah, and you can hear it, but it's easy to gloss over it if you're just, casually listening to some raw audio. It's easy
Sure.
to let it go by. It gets lost in the sound of just the
Sure.
general din of the woods, whether it be wind or the birds or the
It
rain.
kind of brings us back to, the monotony of going through hours of audio to see if you've captured something. Boy, that first time that you identify that you've captured something intriguing,
Oh, just
you'll never feel like this is monotonous again. When you could go hours and listen
yeah,
to nothing,
yeah.
but just that of being able to really recall what it was like that one time when you came across, what is that sound, right?
I freaked out. Mine was, I remember exactly what it was. It sounds like, oh, 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 happy ba. And when I heard the enunciated happy ba, man, I kind of like, I knew they spoke from the Sierra sounds, but
Mhm.
this is something like the first like bona fide enunciated expression that I captured, did on my own. It was pretty crazy. It was wild.
Well, I've
I'll
had
never
a
forget that
lot of
moment.
different guests on that have shared audio. Tristan was on about 2 months ago. I've had other guests come on and share audio, and it's interesting those um, phonetics that really get displayed. You're right; it kind of has that native type resonance to the speech patterns that aren't really recognizable to somebody who only speaks English, so to speak.
Mm.
But yet, a lot of times it doesn't sound like another animal either. I mean, there are grunting and breathing and that kind of stuff. And certainly, if I'm kind of one that sticks to that flesh and blood realistic approach, that if I didn't see something making that noise, if they're typically what I would consider natural sounds, I don't know if it was a Sasquatch, but then all of a sudden you start identifying some phonetic projections that you can really hear and say, boy, if there wasn't a human standing there making that sound, I don't recognize that as a speech pattern that a bear or, an elk or something else like that could make. So I'm curious, are there certain, like when you hear these sounds over and over, like when you capture something on audio, you've heard it probably 1,000 times yourself, listening to it, digesting it, diving into it. Are there any what you would consider to be, I don't want to say sayings, but expressions that you have identified? And if they are, I'm curious what they are. Let's kind of cover that broadly before we go into the audio recordings. Have you
Yeah,
heard certain phonetics or sayings or what sounds like words?
oh yeah, I've heard words, and twice I have a couple recordings I can think of where you have not only the words, these conventional speaking creations that have to have lips in order to make these sounds, like FFFeem, SFatif, but that expression FFFeem, SFatif has clicking surrounding it and intermixed with it. And the big question is it coming from the same subject, or is it complementary or another subject nearby
Sure.
responding? In Ann Arbor last year, I recorded on my birthday, August 10th, an expression that's Honey-awa, Awashigiwanawa, and another one on the same footage, 9 minutes apart. And I don't know if it was before or after. I'm not clear on that right now, but another one that says Honey Hop Hoskins, Os to the East and to the Osfa. And I think that one is responded by melodic clicking and clucking, as if it is an answer or a retort. They clearly speak conventionally, like we learn from the Sierra Sounds, like I've recorded on my own. But a lot of the conventional speech is like in my 10-minute encounter. It's called In Their Midst, 10 minutes. There are two different versions of it. You hear it one at 3 minutes 30 seconds on the version 2.0 of the In Their Midst, and this subject says "Ebenopsy, ooh ha ha." You can listen to that. I mean, it's enunciated. It has
we're gonna play that tonight.
Actual speech. I'm not sure you can't. Yeah, go to it's the 3 minute.
You sent me
on
the long
link.
10-minute one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that was the link rather than the file, because the file's a bit large.
Okay.
So it would have been truncated if I sent it on.
Well, and
Messenger.
it's something that if you can access it too, I mean, you could certainly play it on your end too. We'll figure this out.
They speak conventionally, and they also have an ability to speak within the din of the woods, like the raining. In my 10-minute encounter that I published, I only heard maybe 20, 30 seconds of that. But I sensed at other times, and when I knew I was having the encounter, I had this raspy. I don't want to say electromagnetic, because people think that they have that ability. I don't know that they do or not. I think they have an ability to manipulate sound and direct it. Like infrasound is used by other creations as a weapon. I think infrasound is used by Sasquatch as a way to disguise or muffle other speech modalities that are happening at the same time. And because the presence of the infrasound, I believe it renders us incapable of hearing what is actually going on. It's just my little theory. I could be wrong. Probably am.
Well, I'll tell you what I appreciate, James. I appreciate you sharing it, saying this is a theory that I'm putting these links together, and then when I look at my data, I kind of feel like this is what my theory is. You're certainly not coming on presenting it as a fact. And I think that's probably the cardinal sin that occurs over and over in this community, is people coming on sharing their theories so directly that they're presenting them as facts. I don't think that really does anybody any favors. I mean, even when Tristan was on, he has so many audio recordings that he's captured. Not one of them does he say, this is a Sasquatch. What he's saying is, this is data that I've captured. I have my own opinions on it. You can listen to it as data and draw your own opinions. I don't consider it to be evidence of anything. It's simply data to consider. And he's drawn his own theories based on that. And I think that is a very great way to present it, because I can tell you almost any evidence you're going to bring to the table, short of a body, there's going to be people that don't look at it as evidence. They're going to look at it as data, and they're either going to give it credit or they aren't.
Yeah. Given my background of all that I've learned and all that I've been exposed to, I do have recordings where I know they're Sasquatch, and I will say that. But I'm somewhat reserved in that. One of the strongest pieces of audio evidence I've gotten was a very close quarter capture after I left a Sasquatch wallow in the Upper Peninsula. This is a wallow that I discovered based on the lead from a local waitress who said she saw one, and it was huge. So I went to where she was, and then I started finding all these structural artifacts, the actual teepees, wigwams, and lean-tos. So I was poking around there. I went back in the afternoon, dropped my recorders, and that 12-second clip that's on the homepage of my website, which is MichiganAboriginal.com. You'll see one and hear one, and the one you hear is the 12 seconds. There are actually like 3 subjects present, and some are speaking with a different vocal modality than that prominent character speaking with conventional speech as we know it. So I will say those are Sasquatch, because I've if the theory is right, here's the scientific method that I've been trying to stick to, really. My theory is that they build these structures, these actual structures, not artifacts.
Not an X fallen somewhere. You're talking about.
Yeah. I do believe they do make X's, but most of those that I see as examples on YouTube are probably natural phenomenon or natural, weather events, something like that. Truth is stranger than fiction, even in the woods. Believe it. I mean, we're talking about Bigfoot here, so it's a rather strange reality. Where was I going? Oh, I got to remind the audience, I'm totally ADD. So Jeff, if you would just bring me back.
No. Well,
I
you were
go off on a
talking
tangent.
about being able to draw the conclusion that certain things
Yeah.
in your mind are Sasquatch, maybe a step beyond just theory for you, because you're probably in totality putting together all of the other things that you've experienced in the area, and as a collective, because really the scientific method, if you're going to draw a theory and say, look, I believe that based on this data, this is what I'm looking at, or this is what I'm hearing, or this is what's happening here.
Yeah.
At that point, you've got to work just as hard to disprove that theory and prove that you're wrong as you do to prove that you're right. To either support it or knock it down. And, unfortunately, that's hard to do for a lot of people. They'll go out and they'll hear the chipmunk in the bag at 3 a.m. and say that's Sasquatch, So,
until that audio is analyzed, we don't know. That's why you got to dig in. And I use my skills. I'm a photographic artist, and I had to learn Photoshop on my own. So very same, approach. Just trying to figure out the Adobe Audition software is a similar learning curve. I think it's probably a little more complex because it's very complex, and no one recipe of mine is like another. I mean, I go through. I have a general MO by which I follow. Then I start experimenting or tweaking here and there until if it's too much of a bastardization of the original clip, then I won't go there. But if it's if it's productive and it enhances what is in the background, then I'll employ it.
Sure. Well, let's talk about, so you've sent me a few video clips. You sent me a few audio clips. Where do you want to start with this? That first clip, the video clip that looks like it's scrubbing a little bit.
Yes. That's one of my favorites. I captured this 6 weeks after I got into the field. It was my second camping trip after I had actually gotten into the field, having done about 6 months of going down the rabbit hole and troubling family, but by my choice of conversations. So this is the background of this. Yeah. Okay.
And we'll see. Hopefully it comes through smooth. It just blows me away that.
And at the end of this, did I send you? Is the 6 second clip at the end of this? It's the actual footage, so you can see that this portion that you're
16 seconds here. This probably has some scrubbing because when I watch the play, it'll go 1.4, 1.3, 1.4. It kind of back and forth a little bit, but.
And the natural movement is you're watching it about halfway through right now, of a pivot from right to left. And right now you can see the upright shape of a hominin. You can begin to detect the ocular recess. As it turns, you could see the auricular recess as well. And then also there's enough light and shadow that gives shape to an upright hominid. You can actually see where its left arm casts a shadow in the light on its buttocks at one point, at one frame.
Okay, I'll go
ahead. And this was a 30 frames per second, unfortunately.
Okay. I'm going to let it play through the second time here. So tell us a little bit about where this was at, Gene.
This is northern Michigan in a valley I've been, playing in since I was a boy, since I was a teenager. Probably a little before that, my father and I had taken his John boat down the river, the river, and fished and did a few fun things. I almost drowned in that river once upon a time. My father saved me. He took a dead cedar pole and laid it out so I could pull myself out of that river. I was in a silty bog that was just sucking me in. But so anyway, it's a place I've been going forever. you know, as an avid angler and as an avid artistic photographer, I would go there a lot. This is the original clip, 6 seconds.
Yep.
So the subject's in the background. Boom, right there. You begin to see him between the trees in the back. Right there.
It's going to try to pause it when it gets right there.
Yeah. And at the 4 second, you hear a slight cooing. I will be bold enough and say that that is a Sasquatch modality. I've recorded it in other times. And you asked earlier about expressions. I have once or twice recorded similar expressions that I have heard. I've also heard similar voices, which is pretty cool, and different times, even different years, in the same spot. So the expression sounds like sweet hot. Years ago, I got one in southern Michigan, and it's like a kind of like a whistle, like a sweet hot, something like that. I recently picked that up last October, the night before my last encounter with the juvenile. There's a similar hot sort of expression. So I've heard that expression. I've also heard vocal modalities sound actually absolutely metallic in southern Michigan, and I mean demonically metallic. And I haven't heard anything like that in northern Michigan.
I've heard. I've got a friend of mine who is in Washington State who has heard. He describes it as a metallic sound.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I mean this is in an area that's out in, you know, I'm not saying that somebody or something couldn't have picked something up that was metallic, but if you were to quick do a 20-second scan of the 50 yards around you, you really don't find anything metallic out there.
Yeah.
So
and it's not the only one. Even in my encounter, the loud boom I heard and felt the percussive impact of that wave, I do believe it's a vocal. Oh, this is a fun one. This is the 12-second one I mentioned earlier.
So tell us a little bit about the circumstances around where you recorded that and what was the setting.
That was on the Upper Peninsula around Marquette. I was up there, and this is 2020. That was captured the night of August 11th, day after my birthday in 2020. And this is the same spot the waitress I ran into who told me about her sighting. Same spot. And this was the second recording I laid that afternoon. I went there in the morning to investigate, came back in the afternoon and the evening with 2 recorders. This was the second one. It was this cheap one, this the one with no computer interface. It's actually still on here. So I'm afraid.
So did you leave it out there and then retrieve it during the time this was recorded?
I retrieved it the next day. Both recorders were dropped by about 7:20. This one I left around 7:20, and the other recorder was set to engage on VCVA mode at 8 o'clock. So there's a good 40 minutes between the time I left and right after I dropped this one, and the time and the time the other recorder. This is the one that captures some other stuff, other amazing, scary stuff.
Tell us a little bit about the area itself. I mean, the comfortability that you would have leaving something in the afternoon, picking it up the following morning, as far as feeling like pretty sure this isn't human interaction in some way, or what's that area like? I mean,
this particular wallow had the highest concentration of stick structures that I've ever seen. And they do have some characteristics in their intricacies. You can tell that if one's abandoned or one's relatively new. I chose the second TP because it did look relatively new and somewhat maintained. And I don't know what the TP is significant. They only tell me where these creations are likely to commune. That's all it tells me, and I just hope to get lucky. So
the only evidence you're going to draw from something that looks like a teepee is that at some point something was here and made it. That doesn't whether that was 10 minutes ago, 10 hours ago, 10 months ago. This really gets kind of hard to determine anything like that. And as far as what made it, I mean, certainly it leads you to start looking for footprints and different things like that. The way that maybe the sticks are broken. But you're saying that we're not talking about, when you say structures, we're not talking about 2 or 3 branches and an X or a W. You're saying that this was actually, what size would you, I mean, how tall and what's the diameter of something like that?
I've seen teepees literally like a child made. I mean, they were no more than a foot tall and a bunch of sticks. And it's funny because some of the sticks were painted red. It's in one of my videos. And there weren't any red paint, spray painted, because the Forestry Service was in one section of the park, cutting down trees and using red paint. So some of these red twigs ended up in this little teepee inside of a bigger teepee, which is, gosh, I don't know, 12 feet tall at least. I've been in the Ann Arbor area where we've had some like amazing trees hauled in that didn't break there, didn't grow there. Clearly they were brought in and by something very large, because I mean there's some of this timber is, I mean, just immense. No one man or small group of men could easily move that at all.
That might be the first time I've ever heard of, a Tinker Toy size teepee inside of a big.
I'll have to dig up my little video or find out which one. It's pretty neat though, but it is a suggestion that there are juveniles present, and that's also another motivation for dropping recorders for me. My initial
sticks that were red colored, I'm curious, James, was it like an opaque red that it looked like paint, or could it have just been like stained with berries or
no,
like stained red?
It was paint, same color as the Forest Service used. I might have a photograph here. It's pretty neat. I don't want to be too distracted by this task.
Well, if it's not easily grabbable, don't worry about it. We can cover that.
It is worth seeing. And it may be included in a video called Eureka, Caught 'em in Conversation or something like that.
So that leads me to another question. On YouTube, does Michigan Aboriginal have a place where you're putting this type of stuff out? The pictures and videos.
Yeah,
or is it on the website?
There is an artifact gallery on my website. As a matter of fact, I think I could call it, my artifact gallery. The website is michiganaboriginal.com. There is the second page, I believe, is my artifact gallery. I don't know if I included that image yet or not. There are other structures, though, that are clearly structures. I recently published a best of volume 3 of some audio I've gotten over the years, but it includes some of the newer stuff. And in that, you have the two audio captures I mentioned earlier, the Haniawa, Awashigewanawa, and the other one. Then I show a picture of the structure from which I recorded that vocal. And then the other one was Honeyhop Hoskins, Vos to the East and to the Osva, and it has the melodic clicking and clucking immediately following that expression. So those two, and they both sound like female voices, separate female voices. They don't sound alike to me anyway. They could be, I don't know. But multiple subjects can be detected in each of those recordings, each of those captures.
Let me, I'm going to play this one more time before I move on to the next one. run through one more time. Yeah, that's it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things that are intriguing about that audio. Is not just what appears to be forceful snapping or breaking, but also, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like either it's a wet sound that's either, I mean, it almost sounds like a foot being pulled out of a mucky puddle, like that sucky sound, you know what I mean? Kind of in the background. Not just once, but I mean, kind of like really present in the continuing audio of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that could be from mobility or locomotion through that type of substrate, or if that's actually an audible sound that's being made. But it almost feels more of a just because of the presence, like it's in the substrate almost of what something's trying to move through. But
yeah, and when I my current thinking is that which you heard are in fact vocals. I remember Moran Moorhead in the Sierra Sounds. He describes during the night when these creations coming in and sounding like they're tearing up the camp, right? And in the morning, nothing was touched. So I personally believe they're vocals. I've experienced their vocals, in pretty close proximity with multiple subjects. And the sensation that you would detect on your eardrums, at times it was like, oh my God, if this doesn't stop, I'm going to die. It didn't hurt, but it was like so uncomfortable, like TV static on your eardrums, or like someone using 60 grit on your tympanic membranes. That was really uncomfortable. But I literally thought those were my last moments. But you hear all that crazy stuff and that big boom. I'm convinced that too is a vocal. And to imagine the lung capacity of the individual behind that boom, in order for me to feel it from how many feet away, I don't know. Because I didn't see anything that night. I heard an awful lot and I sensed an awful lot, and I had some terrifying moments, but I didn't see any of them.
Yeah, there's really, as I listen to not just what people would maybe recall or have as a reference to the sounds that different animals make in these parts, because you're in northern Michigan, I'm in northern Minnesota area. I mean, a lot of the same
similar climes.
Really, I don't get fooled too often, and I'm talking about, I spend hundreds of hours in a tree stand, just quiet and practically invisible, just watching nature.
Nice.
And when you hear the range of sounds that bobcats make and fishers make, and all these different animals that eventually you see year after year, if you're going to be out there enough, none of them are really too deceiving. I mean, the sounds that you hear, you look at the size of the animal, kind of makes sense, right? And then there's one or two that really defy how you would justify how big something was that made that. And the one I would probably most commonly refer to, it's not bobcats or mountain lions, because those, to me, you hear those sounds, when you see what the source of them, it makes sense. But a lynx that's bigger than a bobcat, considerably smaller than a mountain lion, that wailing, percussive, loud, haunting sound that they can make and they carry it on for 20, 25 seconds off of one lungful of air. When you see one do that, you think, how is that thing at 60, 65 pounds doing that, right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so I think to some extent, though, there is that when people hear canines, they hear wolves from a distance, they get confused, right? It's like, boy, that sounds pretty haunting. Doesn't sound like a wolf. They don't realize what it could be. But when you're talking about something that's within 100 yards, making a sound, and you can tell the heft and lung capacity that would be required to make it, that's when it really starts becoming what feels like an obvious, common sense conclusion. This thing is big, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard other people describe that in what I would call close range sounds within 100 yards, that it just sounded big. I mean, that's one of the first adjectives they use. It's not, it was a scream, it was how it just sounded like it was so deep and guttural and big,
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to judge, or at least sense that something has incredible vocal capabilities when you get there in person, experiencing it. That was the night of my 10-minute encounter, or at least the 10 minutes that I published was perhaps one of the most otherworldly, probably the singular most otherworldly experience I've ever had. Although,
I think a lot of it comes from when you have an encounter like that or an experience like that. And I can say this through experience. I mean, having an encounter like I had in 1987, to recall it probably close to 1 million times that I've recalled it in my head since then. You don't lose the details of it. You don't lose those. I can still almost feel the humidity in the air from that day just thinking about it, and I think for you, when you have an experience like that, and those things that made it stand out and made it really I don't want to use the word traumatic, but certainly different than what most of your natural experience would be in the woods. The more you think about it, the more ingrained and resonant it becomes.
Yeah, I've relived my experience 1,000 times at least, and I've listened to the audio in a way that's sort of a way for me of dealing with it, going down the rabbit hole and dealing with the rest of the madness of the world.
Sure.
It's this subject tickles both sides of my brains, and I'm constantly learning on my own and by my own observations, and still from others through people sharing of their accounts.
So Joe asks, how much video of them have you gotten from multiple encounters? I mean, how many times do you feel that you've caught something on either on a picture or video? I would say.
Well, video 6 weeks out, I captured that one in the background. So that's one. My most recent encounter was this past October 24th. It was a Monday morning, raining. A juvenile woke me up. My recorder was going. You can hear both me and that subject. So there's two. The other one was that 10 minutes that I published. That was October 21st, 2019, around 8 p.m. That would be three. So those are for sure and solid.
Okay.
Thinking of others.
So I've got
those are the most prominent.
The next, it's a video of a spectrogram, so it's an audio. It's about 12 seconds long. I'll go ahead and get that up here, and we'll play that next.
Oh, we've heard this, but this is the amplified and clarified version.
Oh, okay. Of the last one?
Yeah.
Oh, sure enough, I haven't unmuted it. Every time you pull one up, you got to remember to do that. Yeah, boy, when you hear that this time,
and you can see
it definitely sounds audible now.
Yeah, it does help to clean up like a little bit of the white noise. Mm-hmm. And it clearly is, and you can see that the intensity of the spectrogram and the amplitude in the spectrograph. You can see how the relationship there. But On the spectrogram, you can see differing depths. You see the most prominent voice there with the more intense coloring, and it seems like it's up closer. So you can sort of envision a 3D perspective there, and that's why I believe there are 3 different characters, or three subjects there vocalizing in their own ways.
Yeah, you hear different phonetics, all deriving from the sh sound. The she, show, she,
Yeah,
you know, like,
and that clicking, the in the middle.
yeah.
Yeah, I pulled a clip from my most recent footage, my most recent trip, that has Scott Nelson describes some vocal characteristics as like a terminal expression, or a terminal something or other. I've got one clip that I'll share eventually with the world that actually is a good example of that, but it's speaking again in that more furtive way rather than the actual audible conventional speeches of the Sierra sounds.
Well, that's somebody that I would definitely, people ask me, well, if you had an audio recording, who would you send it to? I know there's a lot of good answers that could apply there. But yeah, I would probably send it to Scott Nelson, simply because, and I get that there's different opinions on the Sierra sounds. Personally, when I consider all of the totality of it, I had Ron Moorhead on the show here not too long ago with Todd Neese, and the two of them spent more time in the woods than probably 2 people that I know. And they, Todd was telling me that Ron had a lot of Sierra recordings, way more than what were released. And Ron and Todd came on, and Ron said, yeah, go ahead and tell him, Todd. And Todd said one night they were sitting outside their RV with Peter Byrne, Ron Moorhead, and Todd Neese. They were having a drink. They'd been out doing some research that day. And Ron opened up a drawer and pulled out a cassette and started playing it. And it was Sierra sounds. And Todd said, how much of these do you have? And Ron opened the drawer up, and he had like 11 90-minute cassettes in there.
Awesome.
Full. I mean, he's nothing. I mean, what he had released was just a fraction of what he had captured.
Mm-hmm.
And now I get there's people out there say, I don't know if the Sierra sounds are real. I get that. I'm not going to, that's your decision to make. It's simply data to consider as far as I'm concerned. But Scott Nelson broke them down and came up with a library of over 600 phonetics that he identified that are displayed through all of the Sierra sounds that he's heard. And this is just my opinion, but I think that's based on all of them that were captured. Because even though Ron only chose to release a certain, portion of them, I believe the fact that Scott derived 600 plus phonetics out of what Ron released, I think there's a chance that Ron gave Scott access to all of them, and then just told him, I'm only going to release some of them, and I don't want to hear anything from you about how there's more. I don't know that for sure, but I know the amount of material you would need to come up with 600 plus phonetics identified in those speech patterns. It's a lot. But because he's familiar with them, what Scott's really out to do right now is find other credible audio and try to identify phonetics that mirror what is in the content of the Sierra sound. So, when you get audio and there's certain things displayed that sound like, not just a word, but almost like a phrase, you start feeling like, man, I wonder what Scott's opinion is of this. Is it something he can recognize, Yeah.
Yes. This most recent clip that you played of mine is probably the singular clip that's closest to anything in the Sierra sounds. But by and large, my body of evidence is really quite different from Ron's.
Yeah.
And you have Mike Patterson up in Ontario, he has audio. I don't know if that's real or not. I don't have any reason to doubt him. That's just me. And it's completely different from the audio that I've gotten on my own. Have you had any kind of strange feedback sound? Or
So
yeah, I have.
Kaiju Ninja is Tristan, who has well over 100 audio recordings. He was on my show a couple months ago, and we shared quite a few of them. He came back again then on Doug's show and shared a bunch of them. David Ellis had heard them, gave his opinion on them. And one of the things that they had him on for was a particular sound that was being displayed in him that David thought was really unique. But he's asking, have you had any kind of strange feedback sound or distortion on your recordings?
Yeah, and I'm grateful for this question because, yes, I have. And only recently I was recording or listening to my In Their Midst version 2.0, and there's like a dinging in there. And I don't know if it's an artifact from over processing the file, because this one is more processed than another version of that. So I would love an expert, a sound expert, someone who actually knows this software. I just know enough to get done what I need to do. Just to, I'd like to play with it, but I don't know the technical dynamics at play here, and where is this dinging coming from? And I can only hear it in my car, when I patch it through the Bluetooth. So my audio, as much as I've listened to it, I know that different sounds come out depending on the speakers you're using,
sure,
the hardware it's coming from. It does sound different. So I returned a Bose speaker once, nice speaker, but it favored the low
sure,
bass end, right? So it wasn't right for the audio that I wanted to exhibit for a presentation.
Yeah, I've got 2 different pairs of studio headphones. I used to do an awful lot of sound production. I've got 2 different sets that a lot of times I'll listen to something through one, and then I'll put on the other brand and listen to it through that, and I'll hear differences. And there are times where I'll then be in my car that has a Harman Kardon system in it, just nice sounding system, but I mean, it's nothing like studio headphones. And I'll play something through that and catch something that I completely didn't identify through headphones. And a lot of times you're right. It's because the headphones may be amplifying more of a bass pattern than what would be capable of revealing some, especially metallic-y sounds or clicky sounds sometimes.
Yeah, I've literally heard some of the scariest, disturbing sounds. I've also wondered if downstate I've also recorded some other sort of cryptid, or dog band or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not there for most of my recordings.
Yeah,
just the one video and 2 other recordings where I had encounters.
So this one is a minute and 20 seconds long. Looks like dated November 21st, 2019.
Yeah,
what is this
to the date, this is the 30 days after my encounter of October 21st, 2019. And this is a slice of, this is 1 minute, 20-second slice of the 10 minutes that I had published in my original In Their Midst publication. So this is surrounding the encounter, and you'll hear initially you'll hear two subjects, and I'm presuming that because they sound at different distances, but they're using the same expression. So here's an example. I forgot about this. Here's an example of an expression that is repeated. And in this example, it's by 2 subjects in the same time frame. You'll hear cluck, 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 cluck. I call it cluck signaling. Then you hear some other funky, esoteric, clicking, clucking kind of melodic stuff. Then you hear a voice saying, Alberta gunfire. I did not hear this. And at that point, I wasn't even aware that I was having an encounter until maybe midway through, or maybe a third of the way through this clip. You hear a melodic sounding some sort of vocalization, and then ha in the background. That is the very moment when I knew I was having an encounter. It was a loud, like a baritone voice, like Luciano Pavarotti, hailing me from the river. And that was downriver, and a little bit upriver. I heard this big boom that I'd mentioned earlier, and I felt that sonic, the percussive wave hit me. And the rest of that stuff is madness and me thinking those are my last moments on the planet. There's one really staticky vocalization. That was probably the moment when I was feeling that static on the eardrums. I remember there's a point when I say, "What was that?" My tarp had immediately shed some water. It's as if the tree that it was tied to, or one of them, someone was messing with it. I mean, there was it was just madness, utter madness for those brief moments. And then things calm down, and you'll hear me in the background talking. You'll also hear some weird demonic stuff. Like one says, "Are you wreaking havoc?" And I don't know if it's in this clip or not, but later on, the same voice says, "Havoc, hate this man tomorrow," in a very gremlinish sort of. Seriously, that's what it sounds like. I don't know if that's exactly what they're saying, but it sounds exactly like that, and it's creepy. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know if my legs would get working fast enough underneath me if I heard that. But
well, I did consider running. I'm thinking, no, you don't want to be prey.
Yeah,
I was
true.
halfway through my second beer. I'm thinking, I took the path of least resistance. I sat
At that
down.
point, it's like, even if that's not a Sasquatch out there, I don't want to trigger a pursuit mode. I don't want it chasing me.
There's no winning that. You cannot win that race.
It's another human. I don't want it chasing me. So,
well, this juvie that woke me up last fall, he was fast, and I didn't hear him leave at all. When he took off, I said, "Get out of here!" And he took off, and I really didn't hear, but maybe a footstep. It was. I mean, they are so stealthy. It's incredible.
Yeah.
But he's also using a vocal modality to wake me up, that juvie, that you can hear some things similar in this audio clip that you're about to play.
I noticed that too in Blaine Heicheck's recordings that he took overnight camping with his girlfriend. I mean, they had to hike almost 20 miles back into where this area was in the Boundary Waters. And you hear these sounds, you hear all the knocks, you hear the rocks being thrown at the tent, also in the lake. But as this thing is moving from point A to point B, you do not hear those footsteps. It's like, how does it get from there to the next place?
Yeah.
Really
I wish we could be that quiet in the woods. We can't.
Well, this is a minute and 20 seconds long. I'm going to play it. I encourage people to turn it up, be able to listen to it. Me and James are not going to talk for 120 or for 80 seconds because I don't want to blow anybody's eardrums out if you chose to turn it up. But we'll let it play the whole duration, and afterwards we'll come back and talk about it here.
So. Turn it up.
So, I can hear. There's moments of your voice in there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm talking in the background. I'm about 6
I
feet
mean, I
beyond
can
the
hear
recorder.
it, not so much in the first half, but in the.
Yeah, I'm not even talking for most of
So
the
tell
first
us a
half.
little.
Where'd you go?
Yeah, hold
Oh,
on
there
just
you
a
go.
second. There we go. So tell me a little bit about the setting. Was it raining?
Yeah, it was raining, and it was about 8 o'clock. It was all dark. I had gotten up, and really between rain bouts, I was setting up my tent. I had gone up on a trip that I traditionally would have gone Wednesday night through Saturday night, 4 nights. But a buddy's mother had passed, so I wanted to attend the wake on Friday. So I went up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I only went up 3 nights. And Monday night was the first. It was the October 21st, 2019. Raining. I was alone. Um, on my annual little, adventure. So there for 3 nights, and the first night had the encounter. The third night, I captured the other audio from this cheap recorder under the new teepee that I had mentioned earlier, and this was sort of a key for me to understand the noises and the clicks and clucks, the melodic kind of stuff a lot of which we just heard. But on the 10-minute version of that, you can hear a lot of that, and also some vocals that are more of a conventional, audibly conventional, but not easily detectable when you're there in the rain under a tarp, right?
So, well, I was going to say, and I noticed some of this with Blaine's recordings at Angleworm Lake. If you were laying in your tent, even if you weren't asleep, if you were just, really in those moments maybe before you go to sleep, but still awake, some of those first knocks are pretty subtle. They're from a distance, and then you start realizing they're not all from the same distance, and they're not all from the same direction. And then you start hearing the sounds right within his camp. And there comes a point where it really kind of hits you like, that's probably the point where I would be like, what's that? But when you go back and look at, there's so much on there before that you, in live time, you might not become alerted to, so to speak. You almost discover it in retrospect. So,
yeah. But when I got after the encounter, I wasn't in a real hurry to listen to the audio. It was terrifying enough, and I was messed up. You can't speak to family or friends about this stuff, and my wife wants nothing to do with it. She's tolerated, and she's gained a sense of humor. As a matter of fact, this is my cover. This is her wearing a T-shirt of mine about the time she was getting a sense of humor about this. She still doesn't want to talk about it, but I think at this point she's heard enough from other people that I actually do, and I know what I'm talking about. That I'm not absolutely crazy. I think it's crazy enough to do this in the first place, but so I compartmentalize. I don't bring it up around her, but I was messed up for a good month, and I had no outlets. So after a month, my nerves had settled somewhat. I mean, it affected everything, and not in a good way, because I was aside of myself. But after a month, I pulled the audio, not thinking I was going to get a lot of good stuff, because it was raining and that was under the tarp, and I thought that would just drown out, all that I heard. But I was relieved to know not only did it pick up what I heard, it picked up a lot that I just did not even know what's going on. At times I did experience a sensation on my eardrums, like as I describe, a harmonic resonance. And
Mhm.
but that this audio recording, when it wasn't raining and when they were speaking both conventionally and with the melodic clicks and clucks, this helped me decipher what I went through 2 nights before. Um, and
I'm
yeah,
curious, when you describe that kind of harmonic resonance, so to speak, maybe you had said earlier, maybe this is the after effects of being exposed to some infrasound. Um, Other than your ability to audibly or your hearing to comprehend something maybe clearly, did you sense any other repercussions from that? Did you, dizzy, delayed
no,
reactions, things like
no.
that?
In the 10 minutes that I've just in a lot of uh, my audio captures, there is an infrasonic component that is visual graphically on the sonogram or the spectrogram. And it's interesting because when you have an intense yellowing down there around the 20 hertz level, I believe I kind of refer to it as an infrasonic origin of
Yeah,
speech.
yeah.
Maybe it's a component of the overall speech. I don't know. I have no idea. But when it is present, there seems to be a dimming out of the white noise and a sort of a blackening of the spectrogram and a corresponding amplification in the spectrograph right above those. So you're getting some sound, you're seeing it, it's kind of blocking other stuff out. That's just visually, and that's my, uneducated. I'm no scientist.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know the software nor its meaning.
Well,
I'm
I've
probably
heard that described by other one other for sure, one other audio, what I would consider to be an analyst who's really good at that, and also someone who works at a bioacoustics hub.
oh
That when you start getting below 20, especially into the 18 hertz range, that you start noticing that.
interesting.
That
So
high
that kind
end
of
stuff starts to become muted. It's almost as if the audio
yeah,
capture device starts to work at picking up that low end sound, that it desensitizes its ability maybe to pick
yeah,
up high end sound. It kind of makes you wonder if your ears don't do the same thing,
yeah, yeah. Well, it's like that infrasonic kind of flips a switch on us and or disables our ability to hear. I don't know. Again, that's my theory. In the 10 minutes that I published from the October 21st, 2019 episode, you can hear me later on just kind of talking in the background. And I talk about because I was developing this theory. I had listened to a ton of audio from downstate along the Huron River, and I was developing a theory because I heard some vocals that I really, and I didn't have the skills yet, or I hadn't refined my approach to audio editing and appropriate judicious use of filters and such. But I was trying to figure things out, and I wondered about their ability to speak up and down the valley because I heard some sort of percussive. It sounded like speech, but anyway. But I think it was Dr. Jeff Meldrum say that infrasound can be used or can facilitate communication over long distances. So I do believe, and especially from my Michigan Valley Voices, it's one of my most recent publications. I've captured multiple subjects throughout the valley at different points, unknown throughout the valley, and I also got my usual close quarter stuff from a TP that I've gotten stuff from in the past. But this so vocals from near and far, and it is in that capture that sweet hot sort of vocal expression that I had mentioned earlier is also present. Um,
Interestingly enough, when I was in the military, I was stationed for a time at Redstone Arsenal, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. Most of the facility is underground. It's the most spied on facility in the United States out of all the armed forces facilities because they design weapon systems and different innovative systems there. And while I was there was when they were starting to design. I don't know if they were designing it as a final stage of use, but more trying to understand how it would work. And that's infrasound disorientation, playing that on a battlefield situation to
I
really
know it
be
has its applications
distractive
there,
and
no
impede
doubt.
clear thinking. And I know that one of the interesting things that they were finding out, and this certainly isn't top secret because this was 30 years ago and they're actually using now, but there wasn't, there's so many of these systems, you have to wait until a target's within a certain range for it to be effective, right? There really wasn't a range, a close-knit range for this. Like, this could be projected a long ways away and still be effective. So I find that interesting as we start talking about, what you said, Dr. Meldrum had mentioned about how this could be projected across the valley, so to speak, and maybe not, boy, it's only effective if the guy's within 50 yards of me,
Yeah. And in that Michigan Valley Voices version 2.0, that version brings out more of this infrasonic expression. You have this heavy sort of a huffy vocal. It's kind of breathy, if you will. But I believe that is this infrasonic levels speaking, and it is one individual. Maybe there are more. I have no idea. But there's one that at one point, it's almost halfway through the 52-second clip for the Michigan Valley Voices. It's like Captain Cuppy, huh? Sounds like that, but in a very low way. And for 52 seconds, you don't have you have multiple individuals, but it's as if they're communicating in a civil fashion. It's not chaos. When you listen to this, they are communicating. It's like they're having this session for 52 seconds, and then the rest of the vocals available for the rest of the night are back to that furtive, hard, esoteric, hard to hear kind of stuff.
I think that you really bring out, you point out an interesting projection that one could put out as to a lot of times when you develop a tactic in research, you really got to ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve here? And, so many audio recordings, whether they're audio pulled from a video or whether they're captured on an audio device, are displayed, I think, assuming that it's Sasquatch that makes some of these sounds, it's displayed from that standpoint. I don't want you here. I want you to leave, right? They're kind of aggressive. They're kind of, they're meant to be a deterrent, and yet when you leave an audio recording device and abandon it overnight, I do hear those devices capture what could be surprise or displeasure with discovering something hanging on a tree in an area that they don't want it to be. But I also hear examples of like what you're displaying, what you're describing, just casual communication. I mean, there really is, assuming that they're either not sensing a battery presence in it, or if they do, they aren't alarmed by it. There certainly is no IR flash going off. There is, it's just hanging there. And I think that that's probably your best bet at catching them in a comfortable, casual way, is just abandoning those audio devices in what you would consider to be a high value target area,
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. And repeatedly I get audio. I mean, it is the scientific method. The theory is they build these things and they commune in these areas. The audio sort of confirms that. And I've repeatedly done this over a number of years now.
Now you've derived these targets for where you leave audio devices based on what you're visually seeing in those structures. But just to try to help somebody out who's maybe they don't see those structures in their area.
Well,
I
always, part of it for me is seeking these things out. Let the adventure begin. Look inside of oxbows of rivers. Look on the corresponding other side in hills. Go to low traffic areas and go to areas where power lines and railroads and rivers meet. These are like great grand intersections. Maybe it's crossroads for Sasquatch socialization. I have no idea. How do you? I want to answer.
I look at it from the aspect that when I approach a new area archery hunting white-tailed deer, I mean, I'm trying to identify 3 different things: a food source, a bedding source, and a water source. And once you identify A, B, and C, you start realizing where likely corridors of travel would be as they rotate through those 3 needs that they have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if you weren't intimately familiar with an area, but you identified a bunch of blueberry bushes and 3/4 of a mile away, there's a creek or a waterway, I'd say connect those 2 dots and put an audio recorder between the 2. Those are both areas that should be attracting not only a Sasquatch if it was there, but bears and other large game animals. So they would both probably be interested in those. So, you can really look at, especially with Onyx and a lot of the mapping apps that we have on our phone, to identify these resource-rich areas where there's berries or where there's cropland or where there's, if you discover a garden and maybe somebody has a rural place and there's a large garden and a mile away is a creek, I'd put an audio recorder between the 2. I mean, you've got to start somewhere, first of all.
If you're that determined, go for it. I recommend finding the actual structures, because if you poke around enough, you're going to find actual wigwams, teepees. At least in Michigan, and I found them in southern Ohio. I found them in Vermont. I found them in the UP, the Lower Peninsula, and even around Detroit. We have 3 watersheds around Detroit. Each of those are Sasquatch habitat. It's the truth. They're there. I've found structures within the city limits of Ann Arbor, within the city limits of Mount Clemens, real close to just 20 minutes north of Detroit. Or Southfield, that is 20 minutes outside of Detroit. It's like one of the first suburbs outside of Detroit, up the Lodge Freeway. And there's an offshoot. There's a greenway offshoot through a golf course into Bowervik Woods Park. It's on my website. You can go there and find these structures, and those are the types of structures that I check in and check up on every once in a while. Not often. I don't. It got to a point where I was recording all the time, and then my returns were diminished within increased presence. Caillou Ninja asked if I bury them. I do. I put the recorders on the ground. I don't hang them from trees. I put them under leaves, and most of the time, I'd say 9 times out of 10, they do find them. One time where they didn't, I don't believe they found it, was the night of the Michigan Valley Voices version 2.0. That I captured last October. What was that? October 22nd, I think, that night last year.
Just kind of off the cuff, have you ever had batteries, what you would consider prematurely drained in one of these devices?
I did have that experience with a GoPro, though it was 22 degrees out there, and I was hiking with the GoPro exposed to the air, so it could have been just a too cold of a day. And I think that's likely what it was. I haven't experienced that phenomenon where I can say that, that's definitely what it was.
Yeah.
Or I could have grabbed the wrong battery and shoved it.
Well, the only reason I always like to ask that question, because I had a really, really interesting situation happen where I had left some audio recorders in an area of the Pine Island Forest that I considered to be very remote. There was really no traffic there at all. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't during a high time of the tourist season of the lakes area. So even though this is remote, there's even less people around there. Was not during hunting season. I had left some audio recorders out there, and I also left a fairly new game camera that I put brand new batteries in, 8 brand new AA batteries in, unwrapped them out of the package, put them in, went there the next day, and I pulled the SD card out and I put it in my reader, and there's nothing there. And so I started looking at the camera, and I go to power it up, and it won't power up. I brought the device home, took the batteries out of it, and just out of curiosity. I can't remember if this is after I talked to Doug and he told me to check the batteries or not, but I put a voltmeter on the batteries, and every one of those AA batteries was drained to 0.37 volts.
That's crazy.
Every one of the 8. Now, this made me really curious, because then I had to start taking these cameras and leave them powered on for a month and a half until the batteries would go dead naturally, and retest them. And you'll get one that'll say 0.39, one that'll say 0.24, one will say, I mean, you can't find 8 batteries that read the same as one other one.
That's truly amazing.
And to have all 8 batteries drained to exactly 0.37, I don't really, that's something that I don't even know how to draw a theory on. Like something purposefully somehow discharged them, but at an exact even rate like that. It just blew my mind.
That's amazing. I love that. No, I can't say that I've definitely had one of those experiences. Maybe that day it was one. I don't know, because we ran into some interesting stuff, and I got some still images of what could be pareidolia. I don't focus on that stuff anymore. Still images are just, not my bailiwick anymore. This audio is far more dynamic and interesting as, artifacts from my poking around. Yeah, still images are a problem. I've gone down that rabbit hole, and I did the pareidolia thing. I think everybody, at one point or another.
So one of the things that we played, and one of the things that me and you were talking about, was an encounter that you had last year with what you considered to be a juvenile. Tell us a little bit about that. Kind of walk us through what happened at that point.
Well, the actual moment, the setting was another rainy trip. It was raining the last night, and there was a hole in my tarp above my tent without the rain fly on it. So I would get a little drip, and it would like diffuse when it would hit the screen of my tent and just kind of wake me up. I was not having a great night's sleep, but toward the end of the night, third night of not sleeping well, I was in a deep sleep. I remember that I was dreaming very vividly about a new job I was going to start 1 week from that day, the job I currently have now. And anyway, I heard this. I was in a deep sleep. I was awakened to this. It sounded like a hissing to me. That's how I interpreted it. That's what it sounded like most to me. But it had a gurgly, gravelly sort of characteristic to it. It was certainly nothing that I've ever heard before. I rolled over, and I see the subject. It had stepped back a little bit as I rolled over and looked up. It was like finishing up a step back or two. And I'm looking at it. It's about 4 foot tall. It's dark. It's 6 a.m. Raining, and it's under my tarp, under my big blue one, even when it steps back. And I said, "Hey," and it flinched. Then I said, "Get out of here." And by the time I had my arm fully extended, it had gone in that direction. And I didn't hear much of it after that. But my recorder was going. You can hear. I think I have three videos that I put together with commentary. I think the audience members can scroll down on Michigan Aboriginal Project on YouTube and go down the video list. And there's Encounter Audio and A Very Rude Awakening is one of them. So I have like 3 little videos in a row that I published last fall, that you can hear that audio, and that's it. And you can, as I've cleaned it up and amplified it, you can tell that it has the components of speech. There's one video called Prosody, which is some elements and cadence and other components of speech that makes it speech, right? So that gurgly, gravelly affect to the hissing I heard was actually Sasquatch enunciation, if you will. And you can look at that on the spectrogram and see that expression has, purpose or design, and it's pretty creepy. That's I left. That was my third night, and I left that day. I didn't feel welcome. I needed a
I
good
don't
night's
blame
sleep.
you.
I went home. It was actually very terrifying.
It's funny because, a lot of times when I've had this when I share my encounter with people, and people will ask, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? It's like,
you never know when or what.
A great example is a story I shared recently where my dogs were flipping out in my yard at night about 3 a.m. And when I have deer come through, they'll do that for 2 or 3 minutes. The deer run off, they're done, right? They quiet back down. But I had 2 labs that just were going for about an hour. And I thought, what is going on? And I loaded up my shotgun. I'm in boxer shorts and a hooded sweatshirt with boots. And I walk out.
Elmer
And
Fudd.
it's cloudy. You can't see 20 feet. It's just pitch black. And I see both my dogs fixated on this tree line. And I start walking towards that tree line. It's like a black wall in front of me. I can't make out trunks of trees or anything. And I look back at the dogs and I kind of sense where they're looking at. And I kept walking that direction. When I'm about 25, 30 feet from the tree line, I hear this roar. I mean, it was a mountain lion. I knew right away when I heard it was a mountain lion. And, there's this whole don't trigger pursuit mode thing. But at 3 a.m. when you're in your underwear, you're like, I turned around, I ran for the front door. I thought I'm close enough, I'm going to make it. I got inside and my wife was like, what's going on? I said, there's a mountain lion in our yard. And she goes, really? She goes, did you shoot at it? And I looked down at the shotgun. I forgot I was holding the shotgun the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, people are like, why did you shoot at? Some things kind of escape your mind in the duress of a moment.
You don't think of it. I was up in one of the encounters I've had. I was with my daughters, and we ran into 3 subjects. It was the first time I'd ever witnessed red eyes shine. But I had all my gear. I had my FLIR. I had a night vision, like an infrared camera, recorder probably. I had my gun. You forget about all of that when you have an encounter like that.
Yeah.
This was creepy. I was with my daughters and one of their friends who grew up in the Upper Peninsula. She had never experienced anything like this, but it turns out to have been 3 subjects. And the last one revealed I remember it revealed its singular eye. I remember the silhouette of leaves, passing from it, to reveal this, singular red eye. That was terrifying. That Little Presque Isle Point up in the UP.
Yeah.
And it's I've actually spoken with another witness. They were also on a different podcast. The podcast host had extended my contact information. I chatted with them, and one of they were in the same area, and one of my recordings is called. It's earlier. I got it downstate. It's called The Deep Growl and Infrasound, and in it you have both conventional speech, you have an infrasonic presence, and they said what they experienced was exactly sort of that type of deep growl that is in that audio. It's a 1 minute 16-second clip that's published some time ago. But check that out. If the audience is interested in experiencing that deep growl, pipe this through the Bluetooth in your car, turn the volume up, and you will feel this, the rumbly insides, and your insides kind of turn to jelly when you listen to this. It's creepy.
In the chat, I put the link to your Facebook for Michigan Aboriginal Project. It's got 162 videos there. So if you're looking for a way to spend the next few days binge watching, I would encourage you to go check out James's YouTube channel and subscribe. He's got a pretty hefty amount of subscribers. There's a lot of people who take an interest in what you are putting up there.
Yeah, thank you. It's my adventure, and I'm just sharing my journey. And I never envisioned it leading me down this road of audio. I do have Christopher Noel to thank for urging me to get into the audio. Christopher and I have some differences of opinions on many things, but I give him credit for enticing me. He actually sent me his recorder, which is the same model as this one, that I went out. Then I ended up buying a couple of my own and going down the rabbit hole as I have, and I'm grateful for it. It's really is the greatest adventure that I never saw coming. I just didn't see it coming.
Well, you know, and Christopher is somebody who there's a lot of different opinions. I mean, I'm like you. There's a lot of things that me and him probably don't agree on. And I'm not in the business of discussing things like that on this show. I say, you know, people can draw their own conclusions of things like that. But Tristan asked, James, have you ever had rocks thrown or trees pushed over?
Well, I got out of camp once after a late Wednesday night arrival. This is a few years ago, and I heard a tree fall, but it didn't hit any branches on the way down. I thought it was very curious because where it fell, there are a lot of other trees, and if a tree of this size, judging by the sound of it, fell, it would have been hitting other branches and gone the way down, but it didn't. It was just like a boom, and you know, I kind of think that was a vocal shortly after my arrival. So literally as I was getting out of the car. Someone else asked if I camp in national forest or state or private land. I don't camp in private ground. I'm happy to, but state forests are enough. I mean, you get a campsite along a river, you're in their turf basically, and it's likely that they'll come to you. They like to watch. You know, the first one I saw was an impasse, sort of a stare down. It was the moments before I grabbed my camera and flashlight to get the video that you showed earlier. What happened before that was an encounter. It was just a benign sort of impasse, a stare down. I was looking at this, you know, creation of the woods, this eye shine. That's all I really saw of it. Really wide set eyes. And after, I don't know, that must have been a 5 to 10 minutes, I eventually turned my back on it, which was the most difficult thing, one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Not knowing what's going to happen, right? Because I'm new at this. So anyway, I very nonchalantly retrieved my my flashlight and my camera and got that one just briefly in the background after that encounter. That was pretty cool. And that was quiet night, you know, not exciting. It's like last May, you know, last fall was the juvie encounter I mentioned early on. Maybe it was before the show. Last year I had, on each trip, I had encounters or sightings. The first one was one of the big guys, and it was May 12th. I remember that, and people can go look at the weather, and you know, it was a benign night. It was 92 degrees, a couple days in a row up in northern Michigan, and then the moon was near its fullness. Right, I don't know if it was a full moon or not, but it was near there, and it lit this subject up. The subject had to have been a good 9 foot soft, and it lit him up from the backside and had this like silhouette. I convinced myself it was an arborvitae that I never saw, but in the morning it was gone, and the next night with similar lighting conditions, it wasn't there. So that was a very benign, peaceful, awesome, you know, sighting. Sometime in the middle of the night, I got up to pee and did my business, went back to bed, and it's still sitting there. And that's when I was convinced it was an arborvitae that I hadn't seen. But it sure did look like the silhouette of a Sasquatch, sort of a classic, as if you can envision the moonlight, you know, casting this light on the backside of a subject like that. It was really cool, super cool.
On your YouTube page, out of all those videos, do you have any content that documents some of the structures that you see?
Yeah. You'll see most of my. Well, okay. I do. The most recent video documenting some of the structures that I've seen, including those around Detroit, are on my Best of Volume 3. I have 3 volumes of my Best of series, and more to come, I'm sure.
Sure.
But I sort of laced in images between audio clips, and I'm just trying. But the purpose of my doing that is to reinforce that, you know, they build these structures. When you find something similar in the woods, a good way to test it is to drop a recorder and see what you get. Sometimes you get the conventional audible stuff, like the Haniawa, Awashigawanawa, and look that one up, folks, because it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Which one of the volumes was of the best of shows the structures?
Volume 3.
Okay, so
I put structure images between audio clips. And the first minute and a half maybe is some audio and imagery that I've collected from the woods. And it's in a way of a production, or what do you call it? An opening, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I do include the content showed there to be best of material.
Yeah, let me pull. Let me see if this will come up here. So I've gone in where just past that, and we got some audio here.
Yeah, this clip is the Michigan Valley Voices. The first classic call I ever got was you just heard. That sweetheart was just played.
Yeah, the over the top lingering calls sound distant, but there's several that are in the foreground.
Yeah, it's to the untrained ear, it's difficult to determine what's in the foreground and the background. It's all just sounds, right? So you have to
Sure.
paint a picture with your mind. So here's one of the. This is in Southfield. This is Bowervick Woods Park, where I've documented. This is the structure where the Haniawa, Awashigawanawa, and Eddie Hop Hoskins goes to the east and to the Ospa. The next one is super cool. It has recorded the big boom that I experienced during my encounter, but it's also present in boom. You're about to hear one say Hanzo. Now, the rest of this gets really weird. You hear a buzzing and humming. And there's that corresponding amplification. There's an intensifying yellow spot down there where I feel some infrasonic vocalization is being done, and you have an corresponding amplification in the sonograph, the spectrograph.
Well, that's a pretty intricately designed structure.
Yeah, that's down in southern Ohio at Grant Park, not far from where I grew up. This is 4 minutes, I mentioned, of the VCVA audio captures. In this, you can hear helicopters. You hear a subject say, "Come with me." You have Kapika Swa and Otikapika Hut and FFFim, Mesefetif. These are expressions in this capture throughout the clip. And this is multiple clips throughout the night, so there's no definite timestamp. But this was captured 2 days after 2 nights after my encounter, and this is the audio that helped me decipher what exactly I was hearing 2 nights before during the audio and sensing, really.
So we're coming up
You
on
hear
a
that
big
clicky,
audio.
clucky, watery sounding stuff? This is another helicopter's expression. This stuff is a little more difficult to hear than the other. Yeah. There's an expression in here also that says, it sounds like I had an ascension, and another voice shortly after that sounds like it says, kumbaya. Swear to God. I mean, that may be my auditory pareidolia speaking. I have no idea, but it sounds like that, and it is something. It is an expression made by something with lips.
Well, I would encourage everybody to go check out the video. I'm gonna jump up to where it shows one more structure here. Well, look at all those breaks at about the same height up. But yeah, I would encourage everybody to go over and check it out. It's actually if you go to your list of videos, it's the second one in, so you don't have to search through 162 videos to find it. It's
yeah, it's
pretty prevalent when you get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know how I'm going to spend my tomorrow. I'm going to go check more of your videos out because I have not seen.
There's a lot of mind-blowing stuff and a great variety. And I have to say, my stuff is different from Moorhead's. Positive recording, any kind of possible mimicking of people or animals. I can't say for sure. I've suspected that I have. I thought I had a barred owl sound, and it's really quite audible. And I also have a faint chanting, what sounds like female chanting in that harmonic resonant sort of weird way. It's stuff that I would not publish back in the day. I did finally get a chanting audio last fall or maybe last spring. I think it was last spring that I have published. I felt comfortable enough publishing that because you can detect, you can hear it. It's chanting. It sounds like Benedictine monks, which is freaky. So, it begs the question, what are these creations?
Yeah.
One
time when I was snowmobiling up on the Clearwater River, it was in the middle of the winter. I mean, it was in January. It was a lot of snow, and I had stopped. There was no wind that day. I had stopped, turned my machine. I was alone. I was just sitting on the ice, just listening, and I heard what sounded like 2 or 3 different howls from a wolf, and then I heard a second sound off that was kind of in the same direction, but it wasn't the same origin it wasn't the same source. But then 180 degrees from my other direction, I listened to what sounded like 4 or 5 like as one would come down, another one would come up. So it sounded like 2 sources, like alternating between these howls, but there's no way they were wolves. I mean, it sounded like them, but most of these guys that do this audio analysis, and most of what you hear from the designers of wildlife acoustics and the different software programs that analyze the source of vertebrate, mammal, and avian calls, will tell you that a canine cannot roll the vowel sound A to O or O to A. So when you hear these, sounds that kind of ow, and they roll down like that, or the opposite, that wolves and coyotes can't do that. I mean, that's what they say. Now, I myself, I'm not an expert, so like
that sounds plausible, yeah.
But I heard this. I mean, rolling O to A, back from A to O as they were swapping back and forth, and it made me feel like something's mimicking what these wolves are doing, but they didn't, just because of that pattern of those calls, I had a hard time attributing it to being wolves,
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we'll never know. That's why this audio project is a perpetual, adventure. Learn something new every time. A lot of it's mundane, and you hear the same stuff over and over again, and you stop scoring the footage, and, and you kind of burn out on it.
Greg is listening over on Facebook rather than YouTube, and thank you, Greg. And he asked, "Is there anything that you think really attracts them? Women, children's laughter, certain music, anything that you found consistent with drawing them out?"
Well, a consistent presence and predictable presence, as I have had in the valley, is, I think, a benefit. I camp alone, so no women or children around. However, I imagine a lot of the structures I've found, I can think of two right off the bat, and some that were depicted in my audio artifacts. They're near a children's camp or a children's like middle school, or like a middle school, like Grant Park down in Southern Ohio. The structure, the intricate looking one that you had mentioned, that was not far from an elementary school. So they like to watch, they like to learn, and they seem to be attracted to areas where there's youth and life.
Well, one of the things that you really enact when you go out is similar to the approach that I had designed after probably 100 hours of talking to Doug about how to not be perceived as a threat. I really felt like their curiosity could possibly be their weakest link. And the only way they're really going to express it is if they don't feel threatened. Naturally, I think when they see a human, their first response is, I want that person to leave. I don't want that person in this area. In order to roll that into more of a curiosity about you, I think it's important not to be perceived as a threat. And
Absolutely.
being alone, first of all, is a big step in that direction, rather than there being several humans. But also, I really focused on that when I analyzed what Blaine did at Englewood Lake with his audio recordings. When this thing threw a rock, a rather large rock, at his tent, once he was aware that it was out there, he had an audio recorder going, and you could hear this rock thud and roll, but it didn't get to the tent. It landed just short from where it was thrown at the water's edge, probably about 35, 40 feet away. But you could hear it pick up a larger rock. You can hear it click against other rocks as it picks it up, and it waits momentarily, and it heaves this larger rock that you can hear land, roll up right on the edge of the tent. Now, I'm thinking, what would my response be? It'd probably be similar to what you did, like, get out of here, right?
Yeah.
Not Blaine. Blaine's response was, easy, big guy. Easy.
Yeah.
That's what he responded. And you know what happened? It didn't leave the area right away. There were still knocks going on. There was still rocks being thrown into the water. He didn't scare it away with the way, I think natural knee-jerk reaction would be to either scream or try to pose yourself as a bigger threat than you feel it is posing itself towards you, because you want it to leave. Blaine really took a different response to that, and it made me think, if you're trying to be in an area and not pose yourself as a threat, maybe not admonishing it for simply making a sound or expressing curiosity. And like I say, that's probably 100 times easier said than done when you're in the moment. But that was just something that I noticed about his experience, that this thing didn't leave right away when he responded, because he didn't scream at it or yell at it or tell it to leave. He just said, take it easy, man.
I wonder if I hadn't slept. I've said it before. I hadn't slept well in 3 nights, and this is like 6 a.m. after the 3rd night where I hadn't slept well at all, and I was a little bit ornery, and I kind of regret, because one of my goals is to actually dialogue with these, to get a dialogue, not have one hiss and me yell at it. That's not dialogue. That's tit for tat. I would like to engage in a like Ron had attempted to do, Ron Moorhead, and those guys up there. So eventually, I'd like to have a conversation with Sasquatch, with these ancient,
Well,
whatever
when
they
you look at not just their probably natural starting point of wanting a human to leave an area when they identify a human there, but also their ability to be elusive, their ability to simply recede back into the darkness or further back into the trees. I think that for every encounter that a person is aware that they have, there's probably thousands upon tens of thousands of encounters where Sasquatch was aware of a person and the person never knew they were there. They just simply chose to be elusive and recede further back into the woods. Now, if you're going to go into an area and try to create an atmosphere of not posing yourself as a threat, but also trying to get them to interact in some way, you got to realize, you've got to acknowledge how easy the choice is for them to just simply leave and you not realize they were there. So there's got to really be something to that attempt to make them curious enough to try to engage in that. And I don't think that happens often. I think that the approach that most people take out in the woods certainly doesn't create that type of scenario,
Yeah. I don't recommend going out and banging on trees or whooping.
I've often said, banging on trees or even trying to howl or make vocalizations, you're speaking a language in which we really don't understand.
Yeah.
I've likened it to, imagine walking up to Jackie Chan and trying to speak fake Chinese or Cantonese or something and find out in the end you challenge him to a fight. I don't want to fight this guy, right? So I'm not going to speak a language I don't understand. But
yeah, well, if that ever happens, if I do dialogue, I do have a few expressions under my belt.
I think mimicking expressions that you've heard that didn't sound like they were made in animosity or anger, but out of curiosity, I think is kind of a safe route to go.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. But then again, you don't want to lead on to them what you're doing. But I think they're smart enough to actually figure it out too. They don't seem to mind recorders. And I've actually have some recorders where I suspect, I'm pretty darn sure, that it was handled while they were vocalizing. And it sounds like a mature subject and a few little ones around. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I will address this one last question from Tristan. He was wondering if you've ever gifted them or left anything.
I have been guilty of that early on, and I didn't employ it as a regular thing, and I haven't for years. I just don't. I don't gift them.
Yeah, I don't. The whole gifting thing. My approach to research was to simply go out into a clearing in which I had established I felt they were there in that area, and I would interact with items that appeared that I was just forgetful and left, and then I'd come back and get them the next day and see if there was hair on them or handprints, skin oil prints. I did kind of get into the idea of there's a couple times where I had to walk like 3/4 of a mile back to this clearing from where I left the kayak. And there were times when I'd walk down this area, I always took the same area. One time there was a tree that was downed at an angle across that area. And when I came back the following week, it was moved parallel to the path, not something you had to step across anymore. Found that interesting. Of course, I didn't see what moved it. Can't prove it was a Sasquatch, but seemed odd. It was big enough that anything that moved it had to have had some thumbs on it, unless it was an elephant headbutting it, because it was a big tree. But I would find things occasionally, like a bobber, a fishing bobber, just laying there. And we're talking, this would be close to 100 yards from where the river was. And, it wasn't there the day before when I walked in there. It's like, now, could a bird pick that up off the water and dropped it? Certainly it could have.
Yeah,
But I took little plastic vials that had little screw-on caps that I had put water and blue glitter in, so that when you give them just some movement, it kind of looked like a snow globe.
cool.
And I put about 20 of them and kept them in my pocket all the time. And whenever I would see something, I don't know if it was Sasquatch that left it, but I'd drop one of them vials there. The next week I'd come, that vial's gone. Now, this is an interesting thing because a bird could have dropped the bobber and a bird could have picked up the vial, so I can't say that there is a definite connection there, but the whole gifting thing, when people say, I think one of the things we find ourselves most guilty of is letting ourselves be the center of everything, right? And we really aren't. We aren't a big part of their daily routine. We just simply aren't. Their want to be elusive and their ability to be so good at being elusive probably is derived from human interaction. But when somebody's walking down a path and they pick up a little woven thing and little trinket and say, "Oh, it made it for me," I don't think it made it for you. It could have made it out of reverence for, a lost one, or it could have made it out of for any reason. This habit that we have as humans to place ourselves as the reason for something, I don't think works real well for a lot of the approach we should be taking towards this. And that's why the whole gifting thing, one, you're assuming it saw you left it. Two, if you left berries or left whatever and you come back and they're gone, there's no indication as to really what took it. And the idea that they saw you leave it isn't provable. I mean, they could have came along hours after you left. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, but you do it repeatedly, then you discover patterns. And
you do. I mean,
eventually comes together.
What I think the best approach to leaving anything is to try to incorporate interaction with it. Interaction that you can document. So when I would leave something with a Velcro tag on it, next time I would go out there and see that it's been moved a little bit, it's no longer sitting right where I left it, I'd check the Velcro. Is there hair on it? Is there skin oil smudges on it? Things like that. Leaving a piece of, I used to leave pieces of Biddle honey candy. I had those little bite-sized ones. I bought like a 10-pound bag and left them in my truck, and I'd grab a handful when I'd take off. The big challenge was kayaking about 2 hours up the river without eating them all. They were in my pocket, But I left a couple times. I'd leave them, and they'd be gone. And I told Doug, I said, something's taking these. He goes, "Well, you don't know if it's a squirrel, a bear, or whatever." I said, "Yeah, I don't know how I'd prove that." He goes, "We'll put it in a baby food jar." And he says, "Take the label off it, scrub it clean so it's just a pristine, clear jar, put it in there and screw the lid on." And I did. And the next day I came, that jar's laying there empty with the lid off of it.
Nice.
And I'm thinking, okay, it seems logical that even if a bear smelled that somehow, it would have broke that jar in some way. It simply wouldn't have twisted the lid off. Now,
yeah, right.
But, I'd probably personally, I'd do that 3 or 4 times, see if I can recreate that data. Once I have, I'm going to try to video capture from a distance where that is left. Might leave an audio device a little closer to it. That's where I think some of these things, you say, "Well, I don't know what I'm really going to accomplish by that." It kind of snowballs as to when you start seeing data that is intriguing you and it starts leading you in a direction, you start amplifying the way that you treat that area to where you might draw something a little more conclusive than you did the last time. You know what I mean? And I think gifting is a kind of a way to start with that. But again, don't be doing this as if I'm developing some type of symbiotic relationship with Sasquatch and it's made this for me and that for me. I don't know that we really are capable of being that center of attention on it. And even if we were, I don't know how you'd prove it,
Yeah. It's just not my thing. Although I think Snow White Bigfoot has interesting interactions. I think she uses some method, and I haven't seen her stuff in a long time, but she was choosing a somewhat interesting approach. I just don't have any desire to gift them or interact in that way. I like the interaction through audio. They don't find the recorders all the time, but when they do, they're curious, and you can hear really close proximities, scratching or handling or moving of the leaves or something like that going on.
I think whether you're gifting or whether you're leaving something designed for them to interact with or pique their curiosity enough to interact with it, the most important factor there is, well, there's a couple of them. One, it's got to be in an area that there aren't humans and no other humans are aware of what you're doing there.
Yeah.
So that you can eliminate that. Two, there has to be an approach that is designed to invoke a routine. I would go in on Thursday mornings, leave items, come back on Friday mornings and pick them up. And I always did the same thing for 37 weeks in a row. I left a window. I often wondered, do they come 5 minutes after I leave and interact, or is it the middle of the night? I didn't know. It took me a long time to kind of figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if if they habitate near there or if they're habitating 30 miles away from there. But because they ran across something being left there, and then the next week on that same time frame was left there overnight again, you start interjecting this coincidence as becoming a routine. And so I don't know if they come from a mile away or 30 miles away, but eventually I knew that between Thursday morning and Friday morning, they would be there. They were interested in what was happening there. I don't know what they did the other 6 days a week, but it just became part of a routine. And I think part of leaving anything, whether you want to call it gifting or leaving items to be interacted with, there has to be a methodical regimen of doing that over and over and over.
It helps.
Creating a window for them to interact with it after you're left and nothing's there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no threat, but
it beats the variables of chaos.
But I'm like you. I think that the audio recorders, I love audio recorders. I just love them.
Yeah, it's fun. It is a labor of love. I have to say that. And, I've got some spare time. I'm busy doing other things. I got a very, 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 very busy, rewarding life. It's wonderful.
Yeah. If you own a Harley Davidson, which is kind of a lifestyle, and you're into golfing and you love to fish, you probably don't have a whole lot of room to be putting audio recorders out in the woods in your life because it takes so much time to maintain them and go over that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's.
But then again, if you're only going out 2 or 3 times a year for a week,
mm-hmm.
you're kind of creating a window where I'm not just going to sit by a fire and wait to see if I hear something. I'm going to go out with a plan. I'm going to put these recorders out. I'm going to check them daily and see. And replace these cards and that you're kind of going out with a plan rather than just going out with this idea of let me sit here by the fire and see what happens,
Yeah. And that, I've always gone early May or late October on my trips. And I was going, whether I was crazed with fly fishing at one point, and I was crazed with artistic photography. It's kind of an offshoot of my photography. Then I learned that this phenomenon was real. So as a kid, I had to see one if they were ever real. So I'm living the greatest adventure I ever really thought of, and I'm not yet burnt out. And I do go hot and cold on this sometimes. I've got a Facebook page that I'm hot and cold on. I don't feed the algorithms. I'm happy with every one of the 2,800 some subscribers I have on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I know that it'll build over time. These recordings that I've gotten, I think, are pretty novel. I know that there's a channel called 100 Bigfoot Nights. I think it's Christine Parker, who has some interesting similar stuff, same genre, the stuff that I've gotten. And it all has enough differences, probably a regional thing. Because I don't doubt Ron Moorhead's work. I really don't doubt Mike Patterson's work. I just know that I don't have any reason to doubt it.
I think Ron's a great example of, I look at when I had him on as a guest, and he talked a lot about the quantum Bigfoot theory and his approach to that. I don't know that I align with that way of thinking. I mean, I understand the data that he's using to draw those conclusions. I just don't know if I'd be, when I look at all the different possible explanations and figuring out which one's most plausible, I don't know that I'd be starting on the one that he is. But then again, I haven't seen all the data and the experience and all the things that he's gone through to draw that. But because I don't know where I align with him on that, doesn't mean that I don't think that other work that he's done is legit. I mean,
sure.
I think that people need to understand that we look at that. We really should be. I've said this a million times. We should be looking at the 90% that we have in common and building on it together and moving the ball, not poisoning each other over the 10% we disagree on.
Well, people are people, and it drives me to the woods at least a couple times a year.
Yeah.
It's not just having grown up with three sisters.
It drives you to the woods, but it's easy for it to drive you kind of out of the out of these forums. I mean, I get on these Facebook groups, and I'm intrigued by some of the posts. Some of them are just purely entertaining, the way some people approach things. But then there's other times where it's like, you know what? It's like chocolate for me. I can go 7 days without chocolate, and I'll eat a Snickers bar, and I'm good for 2 more weeks. I don't need chocolate for a while. It's almost too rich. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I feel about some of the groups and some of the community, the way that it's kind of cyclic. It gets to a point where I need a break from it. You know?
You have to, just to maintain your sanity. And I got involved early with significant sophomore enthusiasm and accepted all sorts of invitations. And here I am at this point. I prefer to be alone. I work alone. I was going to the woods anyway. So this is just something extra that I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And it's really enjoyable. And quite honestly, it consumes most of my time while I'm out there. And today, even as we speak, it consumes every thought. I'm thinking about it all day long.
Yeah.
It's just that, and it's very difficult to maintain the appearance of sanity.
It's funny because I think even when you that's something we share in common. I think even if you're going to be out there for 3, 4, 5 days and you're like hanging audio recorders, you're thinking about this stuff, you kind of fixated on it. And you say, I'm going to take a break from this. And you went over and you started fly fishing for 3 or 4 hours. It still is in your peripheral.
Yeah.
Constantly.
It has to
when
be.
You're out there.
You can't get rid of it.
No.
It's just, it is what it is. It's kind of the burden we bear. The cross
I think
we
once
bear,
you have an encounter or have an experience, it's going to be tattooed into your peripheral where you can't get rid of it. Some people react differently. Some people, it drives them out to even feel comfortable in those scenarios, and they don't go out in the woods anymore. I've never been like that. I've never lost my passion for the outdoors. But I mean, even when I'm in a boat in the middle of the lake looking at a forested shoreline, I don't just glance by it. I'm like fixated. I'm looking for movement on that shoreline. It's just it's like stuck there.
Well, we're aware. Call it a curse or a blessing. I don't know, but and it's probably both. But I do feel like a little kid out in the woods again, and I'm trying to, use my God-given talents to figure this out.
Well, that's awesome.
We can go on for another 2 or 3 podcasts on the biblical parallels and connections to this, or what is the significance of their very existence. I mean, it does, in fact, it's just a line of thought, but it, you know, parallel to my biblical studies over the past, I don't know, 12, 14 years, um, between 3 different Bible studies, there are correlations. There are mentions of the giants. There's prophetic the return of the giants. There are different people of great statures and great numbers, like the Zamzummim mentioned in Deuteronomy 2nd chapter, verse 20. They get one mention of the Bible, just one. You look at the origin of their origin of their name, Zamzummim, as Zimzum. It's an ancient Hebrew word, and that word has a connotation or a meaning to buzz or to hum. Now, I've got a lot of different vocal modalities that I've recorded that have a buzzing and humming. Even in my encounter, I experienced that raspy, buzzing, humming on my own tympanic membranes, right? So could these be remnant populations of the Zamzummim people? Or in 2 Kings 19, the Syrian kings are mentioned to have killed great numbers of, you know, people, including the people of Eden. Our watersheds are as near Eden as we're ever going to get. Are these a people of Eden? We don't know. I mean, and I don't know that we'll ever know.
I enjoy conversations like that. I'm not afraid to speculate on things. I certainly don't portray it as fact and don't respect when other people do that either. But, you know, it's fun conversations to figure out what slot this thing fits to, right? And I don't know what slot Bigfoot fits in from a flesh and blood perspective, but from the same aspect as a Christian, I don't know what slot that giant would have fit into that David killed with a rock, you know? So I don't, you know, but I appreciate when people have those conversations. I just, like I say, I mean, and it's something that you're going to lose. I mean, for some people, it's like Chevy and Ford, you know? I mean, for some people, they just can't find a footing in that conversation. But I approach everything from a flesh and blood standpoint, looking for what slot it fits into. And if the data leads me there, we can talk about whatever that data leads us to, or how it could be perceived. I don't start at portals. I don't start at orbs being cast from them, shedding energy as they emerge into this dimension. I don't start there. I look at the flesh and blood approach, but I'll tell you what, if data led me there, I'm not afraid to go if that's where the data is going to lead.
Yeah, well, there's a lot. I mean, their very existence, I believe, challenges the theory of evolution, because they have physical abilities. I mean, they're naturally adapted to all climes of this planet, and they have, at least in the vocal arena, I've learned, they have many different vocal modalities. If in fact it is every time I'm going out there recording Sasquatch or these Aboriginal giants, or you know, however, Zamzummim, whoever you want to call them. I don't know. It's just, but it keeps me coming back. It's a great and challenging intellectual endeavor, which you know, I've learned. I've been depressed, and depression is when your brain just kind of shuts down all sorts of different places, and it takes a long time to regenerate those synapses. So I've walked this dark valley, and to come out on the other side being stronger, having learned more, and learned that this really is a real life planet of
and
the apes.
And that's a real thing for a lot of people, James. I mean, retraining your brain to search for joy instead of amplifying defeats really takes time.
You put that in a very poignant way, because I've been there, and I don't want anybody else to be there. And you know, you look at, I have a personal goal by my example, and I've prayed on this journey throughout, and my prayers have been answered thousandfold. I never imagined this journey would take me to where I am, to where we are today. But kids are killing themselves, especially young men, and in this society, we're in age, we're in the autumn of our years as a country. Unfortunately, it feels that way. And I think young men especially are increasingly marginalized by today's increasingly feminist society. That's not a knock on society. It's just a natural progression that societies go through. They go from the masculine to the feminine. depending on their life cycle, society's life cycle. But young men are killing themselves, and I think they don't. Who are their heroes these days? You know, who do they look up to? I realized that we have but one Father. This is just my personal journey. We have but one Father, and that epiphany brought me closer to my own biological father. And that is a blessing. It's something I've always wanted. It's the reason I moved up from Dayton, Ohio, living with my mom and 3 sisters, to live with my father. And that was a tough move because we didn't see eye to eye, especially early on. But now we're going to sail another Mackinac race this year. He's an avid sailor. He's going on 88 years old.
Wow.
And we're going to be on Lake Huron, sailing another Mackinac.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, being the little boys that we are.
Well, you have to shoot some video of that for sure and put it on your channel. I'd love to see that.
Oh, it's I haven't done a Mackinac in, gosh, I don't know, 30 years. He's my father's done it. He's an amazing creation. Still alive and kicking it and full of piss and vinegar and keen of mind. I applaud him. He's done everything right. I, on the other hand, have had probably quite a few more vices than he has over a course of a lifetime. So I can only hope to have his longevity. But I'm grateful for these blessings to have a relationship with him, to realize that we have one Father. Yeah, no doubt about it. And the adventures continue, whether it be on the lake or in the woods. Each has adventure. There's adventure abounds in life.
Well, I'll tell you what, you keep the adventures going and we'll have you back on again.
Man, right on. I'd be honored. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for having me on. And you know, I can't speak of this freely in my close circle of friends or my family or with my wife, and I respect that. I've gotten to a point where, okay, they just don't get it. I can be the black sheep. I can play that role, but I'm having the best time of my life. I really am.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, sharing what you've came across and the data that you collect, and I can't wait till we have a chance to do it again. I'll love to see what you bring to us. So
yeah, I've got some more audio to go through, lots of it, and I'll be sharing that as time allows.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James.
Thank you, my brother.
I will stay in touch with you, and we will line up a time to have you back, maybe towards the end of the summer. So
wonderful. Thank you. Peace be with you and the audience. I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
All right. Thank you. Well, like I said, I thought it was going to be a great show. I think it was. I really enjoy when James comes. And look, I get it. It's not James. I mean, any guest that I have at some point during the course of a show is going to say something that people are going to say, well, I don't know if I subscribe to that, or I don't know where I line up with that. You know what? Focus on the 95% we're sharing in common, not poisoning each other over the 10% we don't. I get through perspective. I've got very, very, very close, good friends who are researching, who are in the field, who don't share my Christian perspective, but that certainly doesn't keep us from learning from each other. And I love that. I love that despite some of our obvious differences, we still can look at each other and say, I appreciate what that person's doing, or I appreciate how they help me understand this, or whatever. So, I just encourage everybody to always maintain that approach, be respectful, even when we have a difference with somebody else's approach to something. But thank you so much, everybody who came. Thank you for the questions that were asked. I will encourage you to smash that like button on your way out the door. And those who are listening on podcast, your favorite podcast platform, I appreciated you joining us. If you ever have time, you can hop on YouTube and find Untold Radio Network. Understand that Pine Island Research is on every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We also do a show that I host on Monday mornings at 11:30 p.m. Eastern called Coffee Time. But throughout the week, there's something for everybody here. There's some shows that focus on ufology. There's other shows that focus on Sasquatch. wherever your interest lies, in the mystery of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, other areas of the paranormal, ufology, I encourage you to check the channel out. There's probably something here that you will find intriguing, and thank you so much for doing so. Let's find our rollout video. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next Monday.